Okay, welcome back everyone. And this section, what we're calling part two, um, will be about the deep questions. We'll have you thinking very deeply about neuroELT concepts. Um, Now, we've covered these questions once before in that Friday session at Fab 5. However, since it's been a long time um, since that night, I'm pretty sure your answers may have changed because you've had a lot of time in between, possibly to think about these concepts consciously and uh, hopefully unconsciously. Okay, as we all know, the brain works on these problems while we're sleeping, and even in daydreams, and sometimes we're not even aware of that happening. So it'd be interesting to hear your newest responses to these. Okay. Now, the first question I have here is about memory, and it's related to skill theory specifically. Um, Schachter and Loftus's memory work. Um, in their work, basically what they say is memory is a process. It's not really something concrete in the brain. It's not like a book. It's not like a computer. It's something that happens in real time. It's a real time process. And memory is something for simulating the future. Okay, it's not about remembering the past so much, but its main purpose is for simulating the future so that we can live life properly. Basically, comes down to being able to understand what our next move should be. Okay, um, if that's the case, then shouldn't memory be regarded as a skill? We have skills like that we understand very clearly, like computer skills, or the ability to ride a bicycle, or driving skills, or even the being able to walk down the street or to run quickly. These are all skills. So in each case, we are using our background knowledge. We are using experience from the past to create, um, I guess, templates for how we should run in the future, or how we should be driving. So I really think, memory should be regarded as part of that skill set, or just even a skill itself. What do you think about that? Um, isn't memory a real-time skill that depends on our DANs? Okay, that's another way to look at it. Remember, DANs, as I covered in part one, stands for Dynamic Acquisition Equilibrium Network. It's taking our lingering networks, that we had produced in the past, and using them to create equilibrium with the world we're in. So, like if you're sitting in a car and you have to get from place A to place B, you're using your DANs to the best, of to the best, yeah, as best you can, right? So, in that sense too, I mean, more and more memory itself sounds more like a skill, doesn't it? So, what are the pedagogic implications from all of this? Okay. Now, after each slide, please stop and think about your answer, and jot your responses down on a notebook, or in your computer, and then come back to the next question, or just skip over them. Just focus on the ones that interest you the most. Okay, we'll leave that up to you. But yeah, please don't try to sit through all these questions in one shot. That wouldn't be very helpful. One of the best ways of going at these questions is actually to sit down with somebody else and talk these answers over, even if it's somebody that hasn't been to one of our fab events or doesn't really know much about skill theory. That's fine. Walk them through your understanding of skill theory, and then work on these problems together. Okay, that's probably one of the best ways of going at it. Um, of course, ultimately, I would like you to put a few of your responses up on the forum so that we can, have a grand discussion amongst us. Okay, thank you. Now let's look at the next question. What reasons do you give for people not always being at their optimal levels in each domain? Now, it's painfully obvious that most people, most of the time, are not at their optimal levels. Okay, um, even in domains that they like to be in, even domains that they're good at, they're not fully focused and fully functioning all the time. Now, what reasons do you have for that? A, it would be socially awkward or atypical to social norms, as in maybe a savant. Okay, how much validity do you give to this? Okay, or B, it requires too much energy to be constantly thinking at your peak level in each domain. Hmm. Or C, maybe both. And if you think it's both, then which of the two is stronger? Okay, think about that. And then, of course, we have D here. Is there some other answer that you can come up with? All right, next slide. This is one that's a little bit difficult to understand, but let me read it to you. Once you put a label on an AB3 or say an AB4 thought, okay, and then these are abstractions, right? It can paradoxically be limiting your thinking. What do I mean? Less working memory is being used because that huge map is now reduced to a single lexical item. Okay, let me unpack that. So say AB3 is abstractions level 3, right? So it's a system of abstractions, okay? Or AB4 is a system of abstractions, a huge, gigantic web of information that you have to have online in your brain, conscious, juggling around and making sense of a huge system of abstractions in your brain. And this is often cited as the peak performance of our cognitive selves, okay? Now you have all that up in your brain and you're juggling it, and you can prove that you understand it by having a long speech or doing some kind of great presentation, and you can prove to the crowd that you're actually thinking at level AB3 or AB4. Okay, we have protocols for proving that. Now, once you give your great big speech and then you've proven that you can actually compute and enunciate ideas at level AB4, you could label that speech as my dissertation, if you'd like, okay? And well, let's call it Jane's dissertation. So everybody can now start referring to that entire content as Jane's dissertation. And indeed, you could start talking about, you know, that huge, complex web system of systems of ideas in your head as Jane's dissertation. Now, as soon as we start using, and especially you start using that term, you can throw it around so easily that you don't have to think of maybe even a tenth of the content or even a hundredth of the content to be able to throw that word around and still communicate. But paradoxically, now that we have this label for it, we're using much less working memory. You don't have to have all of that on board for communication to happen. Now, why is this important? Well, it's because, like I said, number 2 here below, essentially you have a pseudo P1 and then an actual P1. P1 is the same thing as AB4, right? So essentially you have a pseudo AB4 and an actual AB4. The actual AB4 is when you have all of those thoughts online juggling and you really have your thinking cap on, right? And all of these ideas are in your head and they totally make sense and you have that moment of clarity and you can totally connect all these ideas and make yourself clear to anybody. Or you can just throw out the term and say, oh yeah, Jane's dissertation. And that would be pseudo AB4, wouldn't it? because you know, if you think about it, you don't just by using the term, you don't automatically turn on all those networks. You're just using a very simplistic term in place of all that deep thinking. All right. So this phenomenon of having a pseudo AB4 versus a actual AB4 is reality. What should we call this phenomenon? Okay, that's my question. And moving on, so should we distinguish between a sustained P1, okay, from a flash P1 for pedagogical purposes? This is a related question. Like a sustained P1 is like where you're able to talk about this concept for hours on end, um, something you've studied for years, and you have all these ideas in your mind, and you very eloquently relate them and discuss them, and yeah, you can prove to the world that you're able to sustain that level of thinking with that many concepts, a system of concepts in your brain. As opposed to a flash P1 where it's just a second. Yes, oh yeah, you have a moment of clarity, and you've grasped everything, but it goes down, and then you're not able to sustain it. Okay, so for pedagogical purposes, should we distinguish sustained P1 from a flash P1? Um, this is just a yes or no question. Okay, it's almost a rhetorical question, isn't it? Because why wouldn't you want to, right? But the thing is, how often have you heard of people talking about these things in the classroom other than, oh, I had it, but I lost it, you know, those kind of things. And we don't usually say we had it and we lost it in tandem with the level of complexity. Like, oh, I just had a sustained P1, or, he had a sustained P3, or, she had a sustained AB4, but she lost it. Okay, so that must have been a flash. Maybe it's time for us to start thinking about things in this way. What do you think about that? All right, next slide. Can and do societal norms pull higher level thinkers down? Mm. So, say somebody is trying to have a sustained P1 conversation. Can and do societal norms kind of stop that person from staying at that level? Okay. Are we naturally adjusting to an equilibrium? Okay. If you're in a room and everybody is having conversations at, say, an AB2 level, and you're the only AB4 thinker, do you continue to talk at AB4? Or do you sink down and start having conversations at level AB2? Think about that. Does that happen? Well, if so, is it too elitist to try to surround yourself with higher level thinkers so that you remain in a high support equilibrium? Is it too elitist to try to surround yourself with people who can have sustained AB4, P1 level thoughts? Okay? Is it too elitist to try to enter a room and stay in a room with these people so that you can compute at that level as well? Okay? Is that elitist thinking? What kind of thinking is that? Okay. Next slide. Now, you probably recall Vanessa's work that we talked about extensively at the Fab 5 conference. And she was talking about, the teaching brain, how teachers' brains evolve, and the five aspects that, we should have on board. And one of the key concepts is it takes two to tango. Okay, uh, it's reciprocal, right? A teacher works with a student works with a teacher, and they affect each other. Okay. Now, we discussed last year and also at Fab 5 that two AB3 thinkers could create an AB4 between the two of them because they're interacting and they're causing each other to rise up to AB4. But then may only be able to produce AB3 when they are alone. In other words, when they're together, they influence each other enough to raise the conversation to an AB4 level conversation. That's what we call high support, isn't it? They're giving high support to each other. But when one of them leaves and they're going at it solo, wow, they realize they cannot reach that AB4 anymore, and they're only able to produce AB3. Okay. So my question is, what shall we call this phenomenon? Is it enough just to say that, okay, that person is back down to a low support context? Or should we come up with some other wording for this phenomenon? Please be creative and send us some ideas. Okay, next slide. Ah, one idea I had is maybe social cognition. Yeah, yes and no. That kind of makes sense, right? I mean, but social cognition means something else in other fields of academics. So yeah, please try to come up with some better ideas for for naming this. Okay, and then with those ideas, what are the pedagogical implications that can come with it? All right. All right. So next slide. Now, if we do call it social cognition, or put in, let's call this X, right? Because you're going to have your term for it, hopefully. But I'll just go on calling it social cognition uh, for simplicity's sake. Is social cognition the crux of cognitive development? Is it the crux of teaching? Now, by that, I mean, so if you're going at a problem solo, you can only think at and sustain thoughts at level AB3. You get another AB3 thinker there with you, and suddenly both of you are working at the problem, and between the two of you, you create an AB4. Okay. So, is that the crux of cognitive development? Is that what we should be looking at as teachers, uh, um, rather than this top-down kind of teaching? Should we be having people work together and solving problems so that they raise each other up in this way? It's an interesting concept, isn't it? And should we be examining the discourse of pairs and groups instead of individuals? I'm talking about assessment here, okay? A typical test is a solo test. It only tests for what one student can produce on, say, that piece of paper, or perhaps during that interview, okay? But what if we turn tests around a little bit and turn them into pair work, okay? And then see what the pair can come up with, okay? And then we analyze the discourse to see if between them they're actually producing AB4 level responses rather than AB3. Should or shouldn't we be assessing them in this way? I'm sure you can imagine some problems that might crop up. One side of the pair might not be working as hard as the other side. They might be too dependent. So yes, there are negative aspects to this assessment design. However, please think of the positive aspects that might come from this. Okay, and of course, it doesn't have to be just pairs. It could be group work. Okay, and then of course, what are the pedagogical implications from this? All right, how would this type of assessment change the way we teach, or should it change the way we teach? What ideas come to mind as you ponder these questions. All right, let's go to the next slide. Now, this slide was pretty popular when I brought it up on that Friday evening. Now, there are three strands, right? A, B, and C. And this is work that was done at Harvard, and I think this specific the paper that I took this from was written by, at least co-authored by Kurt Fisher. And I heard him talk about this content directly 2 or 3 times in the past. Now let's look at strand A. Okay, now there's a happy face at the top. I put those icons there. And B, you see a single tear coming from B. And strand C, well, this person is crying a river from both eyes. Now, these icons tell you how well these strands may be working for these students, okay? So let's go back to strand A with the happy face. Now, take a look at that and try to understand what this strand means. A student is working, the child is working on understanding words, and we start off at some word definitions, and then the next step is letter identification and rhyme recognition. So these kind of go hand in hand. This is what this diamond means. There's already a system that's building up where letters and rhyme recognition go hand in hand, and then it becomes a single strand that goes from reading recognition to rhyme production to reading production. Okay, very smooth. And students who have this a dance set up this way, have their dance set up this way, progress very smoothly through their early English or language arts classes, right? So these are for native. These strands are for native English speakers. Now, strand B, which is in the middle there, we start off at the same place, word recognition, and then we go to letter identification, but rhyme recognition did not fit in at that level. Okay, and what happens? You see, we split into 2 areas where, let's go on the left side. We have a network that's going toward reading recognition, and from reading recognition it goes to reading production. We have a totally separate stem from rhyme recognition to rhyme production. So you see, there is no connection between right and left. They're developing separately. So the student doesn't make the connection that, oh, these sort of rhymes match with these letters. They're like separate worlds, okay, within the student. Now the third one, which is the worst outcome, is of course we start off with word definition, but then on the right-hand side, the left-hand side, we have reading recognition that goes on to reading production. That makes sense. But letter identification is on its own. Okay, the student doesn't see the connection between letters and then reading recognition. So like whole words and letters, the student doesn't recognize a pattern between the two. Okay. And then a third strand is rhyme recognition. Yeah, so car and far rhyme. Yeah, I get that. But it has nothing to do with a C and an A and an R, and it has nothing to do with CAR. And from rhyme recognition, we have rhyme production. So that students will start be able to say car and far. Maybe they'll say a word like, I don't know, par, or they'll be able to produce the rhymes. But then if you ask them to relate letter identification and sight words to this rhyming, to them it doesn't make much sense. The questions you're asking them will be elusive. They would know what you're talking about. Whereas, let's go back to strand A, where letter identification and rhyme recognition are kind of already meshing at the beginning, and then everything falls through quite easily. So if you talk to the child about rhyming and letter of identification, reading and writing, and they'll be able to explain these things satisfactorily. Um, so we have three possible strands that came out through this research. Okay. Now, obviously, we want everybody to be A, okay, as quickly as possible. Now, at some point, perhaps B and C students will be able to connect the dots, and then it will finally make sense for them. But there is no guarantee. They might continue on uh, with these separate paths for a very long time. Now, that being said, uh, because I teach here in Japan, something that I noticed is that rhyming is almost never taught in Japanese junior high schools or high schools to English language learners in their English language classrooms. So uh, they are off on their own strand D, where they never get to hear what rhyming is like, and they never get the benefits. They never get the chance to learn English as native English language learners do, and it's just impossible for them to develop English as strand A, as our best possible strand. This is perhaps something that's been terribly and tragically overlooked in many countries. Now, one clue to this I think I have is that in Japanese language, the hiragana and the katakana, the symbols are sort of like the alphabet of the Japanese language. All the sounds that are produced, except for one, end in a, I, u, e, o, basically one of these five vowel sounds. So even though there are 50 different kana, okay, 50 different symbols, they can only end in one of those a, I, u, e, o sounds. So I can argue that all of these sounds are vowels. So if everything ends in a vowel sound, except for the one consonant called un, then the chances of words rhyming are just so high. It's sort of silly to even start noticing them. It's not magical. It doesn't really help um, with wordplay, and it doesn't really help with poems. So instead, Japan has like the haiku, and where they work on rhythms instead of rhymes. I think that's a major hint at why rhyming isn't used in regular Japanese classes in Japan, and this is probably why nobody seems to think it's important, or very few people seem to think it's important to teach rhyming, even in English. And of course, many of those teachers, Japanese English teachers, have not studied rhyming themselves. Okay, so they don't have any first-hand knowledge to be passing on. Okay, so my question here is not what you notice, but my question here is, what do you think about rhyming? Do you use rhyming in your classrooms? Do you think it's important to teach rhyming to students learning English as a second language or as a foreign language? This may be a big question for many of you. Okay, let's move on. Okay, since rhyming, since language evolved from music-like capabilities and the need to collaborate, could adding a strong focus on rhyming be the quick and dirty remedy for many L2 programs? This question kind of builds on the earlier question, but it's slightly different. Our language capabilities as animals, okay, are stemming from the capabilities that we see amongst other animals, right? Um, Many animals produce rhythms, and they use a primitive form of some sort of language to communicate with each other, or simplistic ideas like warnings or calls. But that helps them collaborate. So if that's at the very basis of their communication, and it's probably the basis of the roots of our own communication, could adding a strong focus on rhyming be the quick and dirty remedy? Would it would it really help um, in teaching EFL students? And if it did, would it matter at what age we're talking about? Because perhaps it's easy to imagine little kids, working on rhymes, but how about adults? Would it be more difficult? Or, since so many people are actually interested in music and love to sing and dance, even as adults, maybe it wouldn't be so difficult. What are your thoughts on that? Okay. The next question here is about Bloom's taxonomy, right? Now, there were two forms of Bloom's taxonomy. The one on the left and is the original one, and the one on the right is the newer version. Either way, my question here is, what would be the least confusing way to make sense of Bloom's taxonomy in light of dynamic skill theory? I get this question quite often. And Bloom's taxonomy is wonderful because if you have this chart like on your desk in the classroom, um, you can devise activities based on this, and making sure that your students go through all the steps ensures deeper understanding of the content. But how does that all fit in with dynamic skill theory? You may or may not remember what my response was, and actually, I didn't come up with that answer. I got it from um, somebody. I'll disclose all of this on the forum. Please write your answers on the forum, and or come check out my response on the forum for this. Okay. Now the next question. Okay, about writing. Now, what do you think about this? How about a course that teaches you how to write at level AB3 and assesses if you're writing at level AB2 or AB3 or AB4? Okay. Um, Learning how to write explicitly at any level would lead to learning how to sustain thoughts at those levels, right? We're building on some questions that I had earlier. So, should some language curriculums rotate around this? Why or why not? Learning how to write explicitly at, say, AB2 or AB3. So an AB2 would be a mapping of two abstract ideas. AB3 would be a system of abstract ideas. So having students write, say, a paragraph or a one-page essay, or like a 5-paragraph essay, something like that, and assessing each other, even. Okay, have the peer-to-peer assessment and ask the students to see if their partner has sustained AB3 or has met the AB3 requirements in that writing. How helpful would that be? Okay, I think this is a very important question. So yeah, please think about this, and I'm looking forward to responses on this on the forum. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about CREAM and syllabus design. All right. Now you remember CREAM stands for consciousness raising, that's the CR, emotions analysis, manipulation, and then expansion, right? Okay. So cream is being designed with DST in mind. I should have that in past tense actually. Cream was designed with dynamic skill theory in mind. Rather than focusing on grammar translation methods or audiolingual methods or even PPP methods, which are all basically top-down methods, meaning that I'm the teacher or this is the syllabus that we have to get through, and so do what I tell you. Okay, that's what a top-down method is. So rather than doing that, a cream syllabus chooses generative topics. Okay, a generative means a generative topic is something that is not a simplistic topic. It's something that would get students to think more deeply. All right. So a cream syllabus chooses generative topics and goes from representation levels to age-appropriate AB levels. Okay. Um, abstract levels. So this is hypothesized to create an L2 self, or to help create an L2 self, by developing new separate DANs, okay, their networks. Now, not relying on their L2 DANs as much as other pedagogies. What are your thoughts on this? And why do you think I hypothesize that a cream syllabus using generative topics that goes from RP levels to AB levels helps create an L2 self, more so than, say, grammar translation methods or PPP methods that are top-down? Why do you think I say this, and do you agree with me? All right, let's go on to the next. Okay, so this is the last slide, and I'm calling this mini presentations just to get back into the flow of POU. That's a performance of understanding, right? So in the course of this thinking, so what have you learned, and what can you teach others about this? So look at your notes and synthesize 2 or 3 learning points from the day. And what I mean is 2 or 3 questions that you've tackled, okay? Um, please make sure you upload them onto the forum. That would be your POU, your performance of understanding. And then use the jargon from today effectively to present your ideas on the forum. Okay, I'm really looking forward to discussing these things further. We're only, sort of in the middle stage of these ideas, and so as we work together, we're going to go to the next level. Okay, so something that I called social cognition a little bit earlier. Perhaps we're working on level AB3, but if we work together, um, we can raise ourselves to average an AB4 or sustain an AB4 um, across our conversations on the forum. We're looking for something like that. Okay, thank you very much, and I look forward to collaborating with you on the forums. Bye.